Moral community. What is it? In this video, we'll go through the difference between a moral agent and a moral patient and how those different kinds of agents fit into the moral community. The people or the ideas, the beings, the entities that go in are those who we should consider when we're thinking about affecting them. The people in the community are those who matter. The people in the moral community are those that we should have some kind of consideration for or are in some way obligated to. According to anthropocentrism, there are only human beings that go in the total set of beings we owe something to that have moral worth built in. Anthropos, people, like anthropology, centered. If we were anthropocentrist, we would say that only humans are in our moral community and non-humans do not matter. So we can do things like cut down the rainforest because we don't have any obligations, moral obligations, to the orangutan that live there on those trees or to the insects that live in the rainforest. The non-humans don't matter. We are only obligated to humans. That's what an anthropocentrist would say. But there are lots of different ways to defend the idea of who matters morally and who or what does not matter morally. For example, if we were Jains, there's a religion, Jainism, and in it all living beings matter. The idea is ahimsa. So the insects also matter morally, and we owe them not to step on them if we could. Jainism is one way to look at who's in and who's out of the set of who matters. Familialism says that your family matters more. Others, non-family members, don't. Nationalism says that the country, and then this one gets complicated, of origin or where you were born or where you live now or where you're a citizen, those people like you, I'm an American, so Americans matter to me or should matter to me. Non-Americans wouldn't matter to me. If I was an ecocentrist, then I would say that the entire ecosystem matters and I am obligated. I have to do something to ensure its well-being. So these are some options for different answers to the question, who matters? And by who matter, what we really mean is who we have to consider whether our actions will harm them or help them, because we should protect them, because they're important, because they matter. To whom we are obligated in some way, to whom we owe moral duties. Like we have a duty to ensure that the infant is not ran over, even though it's crawling into the street, because the infant, the human baby, is in the moral community. That's one assumption anyway. So here's our definition of moral community, and we had some examples of moral community. Let's dig a little bit deeper. There's two different ways to be a part of the moral community. There's the moral agent and the moral patient, and these two are different kinds of people or entities. We owe moral duties to both of them. Think about the difference between a 10-month-old baby and yourself. You can make decisions about what to do. You're a moral agent because likely you are not only sentient, you can feel pain, but you can also cause pain and understand that you can cause pain. So if you know that you would cause pain by pushing someone in front of a car, say, and then you decide to do it anyway, you've made that moral judgment. It's a decision, not just a reaction. A moral agent is a rational person who makes conclusions after thinking. That rationality that concludes into judgments makes them accountable. So we can hold a moral agent responsible for their action. That's most adults. Unlike, for example, an orangutan, whose actions are not the result of moral judgments. An orangutan cannot be held responsible for what they've done, for the consequences, whether good or bad. So a moral patient, an example of which are non-human animals and even human babies. A human baby might knock over a hot cup of coffee that lands on their mother and burns their skin. But it's not like that action was the result of a judgment. Their action wasn't the result of reasoning. An infant, like an orangutan, is not rational. They're not thinking about what to do and the consequences of their actions. So they're not making judgments, moral judgments. And that in part explains why an infant, like an orangutan, is not held responsible for the actions that they are doing, because they're not doing it on purpose. It's more like a reaction to what's around them as opposed to a decision. So there's two different ways to end up in the moral community. The moral community being the set of beings or entities that matter, who we owe something to. We owe something to the infant baby, perhaps, if babies matter, if they're in our moral communities, even though the baby is not a moral agent. So if you have the idea of speciesism, which is a theory that says that human beings are allowed to prioritize human beings in this question of who matters, the speciesist would say that an infant matters morally and we owe something to the infant, like, for example, protecting it, even though it's not a moral agent. The baby is not making moral decisions. We wouldn't hold them morally accountable or responsible for their actions, and yet we owe them something. Another example of a moral community somebody might have is ableism. If you are an ableist, then you believe for something to matter, for us to owe you something, you need to be able to do some task. So if you have a physical disability and or a mental disability, then you might not have the thing it takes to be considered either a moral agent or a moral patient. So the question becomes here, what's an example of a moral agent? Jeremy Bentham thought that for you to be in the moral community, you need to be able to suffer. And if you can't suffer, then we don't owe you anything. Peter Singer thinks that it's actually sentience that's the criteria for being in the moral community. So if you're sentient, we owe you something. Immanuel Kant thought that it was rationality. If you're not rational, then we don't owe you something. Under neither of these theories on who matters and who is in the moral community would we count the environment. What about artificial intelligence? These are just three examples of different criteria that have been postulated by philosophers on what it takes to be in a moral community.